Welcome to King Killer Chronicles.
King Chronicle.
Welcome back to part 2 of episode 1 of the Fun Killer Chronicle.
See what happens when I don't interrupt you? This is gold, by the way. We're one hell of a podcast. So, Rex, what is it that you're doing there in front of your microphone with your face all smiles?
Well, what I'm going to be talking about is the characters as they appear in this book. Some of these characters are going to be, of course, through lines. Kvothe, who's the protagonist, is going to be in basically every section we talk about. And we'll be talking about how he grows and progresses, but I'm also going to just talk about what we know about the characters that we see and then don't see again. And in particular, we're going to talk about the archetypes that they embody, some of the tropes from fantasy literature that they embody or subvert. And we'll start right out with good old Kvothe, a.k.a. Kote, or Reshi, Alir, Shadikar, Lightfinger, Six String, the Bloodless, the Arcane, the King Killer, Maedra, which can mean the flame or the thunder or the broken tree. This guy collects names like I collect trinkets at a festival. First time we see him, he's described as the man had true red hair, red as flame. His eyes were dark and distant, and he moved with the subtle certainty that comes from knowing many things. Kvothe's father tells him his name means to know, which adds weight to our first description. Kvothe's defining feature as a character is his genius capacity for learning, for acquiring knowledge and skills. This is what Ben is remarking on talking to Kvothe's parents. It's not like, oh, your boy is precocious or creative or what a mature child you've got. It's that this is a absolutely monumental learner of things.
Sponge Boy.
Yeah.
Sponge Boy Kvothe. Don't laugh.
The character that I'm most reminded of in, I'm going to say genre fiction, because this isn't actually fantasy, is Ender Wiggin from Ender's Game.
Can I tell you, I feel so dumb for not having even tinged that.
Really?
Yeah. For some reason, it's just like, of course, that is his superpower, his ability to learn things. It's so funny. It's just not the way I think about story, but you're correct. And I feel silly for I'm like, oh, right there. That's it. That's who Kvothe is. Kvothe is someone who learns.
Mm-hmm. And it's right from the start, like the first thing we see him do as Kvothe is not just learn, but reason through the shorthand system that Chronicler develops.
Yeah, you see him do something that's miraculous, basically, but through an intellectual realm. Like, yes, this is learnable. It's just he learned it very quickly.
Mm-hmm. And this is a thing that is great about how Kvothe is developed, because this is the sort of superpower that is actual. There are people in our world whose minds work like this. They're just so supercharged that they can learn things in absolute rapid succession. Just pound the knowledge and understanding in. They're few and far between, but like there are people who are graduating from Ivy League institutions with advanced physics degrees in like their very early teens. That sort of precocious brain connection is a real thing.
Yeah, it's not outside the realm of human possibility.
Yeah.
Someone who can learn that adeptly.
Despite the fact that Kvothe is clearly going to be doing all kinds of magical feats, his primary power is a power that's rooted in the standard expression of humanness.
He's a Marty Sue.
What's a Marty Sue?
It's a Mary Sue, but a guy.
What's a Mary Sue?
It's an partially fair, partially unfair trope about some female characters, especially in fantasy, who just seem to be like great at things because they're a shoehorned character in a story?
You mean fantasy, the entire genre? I'm
Yes.
kidding.
I mean, unfortunately, and lots of different stories in lots of different genres, actually. But Kvothe is just like practically infallible. Even with his fallibility, he's still doing remarkable things when he's failing.
I feel like my largest interest in him as a character is how complex the reveal of his personality is in order for us to see him when he is the extraordinary person that he is.
And our reveal of that starts right in this first act. The first we see of Kvothe is as Kote. And he's both our protagonist in this book, but he's also our primary narrator. So getting to know him is this very intimate thing. The character that he adopts as Kote the innkeep, as is the Kvothe we meet when he reveals himself to Chronicler, these are very different archetypally from the Kvothe that we start learning about in his self-narration. The old Kvothe is, he's like a veteran archetype. He's shaped by the things he's done, but retired from them.
I feel so silly. I'd never even thought of that. Of course. It's like he's quiet. He's like the positive veteran archetype. Like, you've been hurt, you've been injured, but you now take pleasure or solace in simple things.
You have this strength and capacity, but you have exhausted your need to express it.
Yeah. Yes.
He's no longer shouting about his deeds.
So I'm sure we're going to learn about how shouting about his deeds is not working well for him.
He's kind of a strong silent type.
He's a strong. We start in complete silence.
And that in particular is part of his Kote. It's also interesting that he changed his name so little in hiding out. And the Kote himself is this obsequious host character. He wants to be present for his guests without being seen.
Oh, obsequious. I feel like that's the wrong word.
It only comes through in his first introduction, and it is sort of characterized as a thing he doesn't do very well. Like, he's trying to present as obsequious, but it just doesn't come off.
The whole first couple of chapters are focusing on a character that is trying to make you not focus on them. It's a really weird device. Like, it took me a while to realize Kote was the main character when I was reading it through the first time, because they even though they set it up and this is the man and the cut flower sound of a man waiting for death, even though they say this is the guy, I am like, what guy? Where guy? Oh, is it the barkeep? Is that the guy? I actually think that the written word of it does a very good job of obfuscating the character himself the way he is intending to do in the world.
It almost gives you the feeling of like, sure, he's going to be the protagonist, but he is going to be carried along on this journey by somebody else. Kind of a hobbity sort of like, yeah, you're here, but like somebody else is going to be moving the plot forward.
Yeah, I seriously didn't even know he's the main character. I'm bad at character identification, apparently.
What I missed in his in my first read through of who Kote is that he is a young man. I came away with this impression that he was considerably older than he's actually mentioned as being.
Yeah.
Oh, here it is. As he turned the bottles in his long, graceful hands, the familiar motion eased a few tired lines from his face, making him seem younger. Certainly not yet 30. Not even near 30. Young for an innkeeper. Young for a man with so many tired lines remaining on his face. And I mean, that's pretty explicit, but it didn't stick.
26, but haggard.
Yeah.
Yeah, that didn't stick with me either the first time too. That was why at D-Day, when you mentioned it in the synopsis, when that made me laugh when Chronicler was like, it was 2 years ago. Like that whatever this thing that made him retreat from the world happened was 2 years ago. And it made me chuckle. And I'm like, yeah, time in this world is interesting, and the clearly the depth of experience this particular character gets out of every year of their life is insane.
Yeah.
The other archetype that old Kvothe is embodying that young Kvothe certainly doesn't is the teacher. So it's a real inversion of the Kvothe that we see in this section, which is Kvothe, the eager student, over-eager, over-apt student. So young Kvothe is a hero without a home. He's nomadic to begin with and bereft of the entirety of his social connections, except for a Benthy, by the end of this first act. His Ademaru origins set him apart from society, but it's with a mix of distrust in sort of a gypsy prejudice and an admiration. The Ademaru are looked at differently than other groups. We haven't really gotten there yet. That I'm jumping ahead a bit.
Yeah, we'll talk more about whatever weird prejudice the culture that the world is in thinks of the Ademaru. But yeah.
So the Ademaru are like the Cirque du Soleil of this world. But like this world has carnies and circus folk. But like this touring performance sort of culture has stratification.
And we get a bit of a taste of it in the interactions with the mayor, despite their status as a Ademaru, is just shuffling them into the category of performing traveling problems.
Yeah, it's very clever the way that is revealed. It's like we are both this kind of thing and we are not seen and we're expected to be this kind of thing. And that is something that we wear on our sleeves a bit.
Literally, because they wear the colors of
their
patron.
Right. They're saying we're legitimate.
We have the stamp of nobility upon us despite our status as nomadic.
As these people that you would normally expect to impregnate some folks, steal your chickens, and do a puppet show where you take your dick out, right?
Yeah. They're
You
like
go to the best circuses, let me tell you.
they're like transient gentry. They don't need to steal your shit. They are legitimate performers. We understand how you could confuse us with someone else, but like, here are our bona fides.
So his Ademaru origin also gives him a raft of really important heroic qualities. He knows how to survive in the wilderness. He knows how to practice courtly manners. He knows how to read and
Memorize
write.
plays.
Oh, yes. Incredible memorization skills. He comes away with an act.
He knows how to read a fucking room.
Yes.
Is what he knows how to do.
He knows a lot of things that...
He has a lot of social skills, what we would call soft skills in this day and age. He knows how to be around and be with people. I hadn't noticed that.
He's got a bunch of useful skills from his upbringing that a village boy wouldn't. It's kind of an inversion of the child's fantasy of running away to the circus, or like an apotheosis of it. If we read that fantasy as one of abandoning the mechanical development through in our day school and career in those days, like farmhand to farm owner, in favor of a life of skillfulness and adventure. Kvothe justifies that fantasy. He says, yes, run away to the circus and you'll learn how to be a hero, as opposed to, a vagrant. Kind of like Dick Grayson, but without the DS lifestyle. Robin.
Okay. Robin from Batman.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Robin does all right for himself.
He's like the only Robin that does all right for himself, actually. Like most of the Robins are pretty shit Robins. Him and Damian Wayne, I think, are the only ones that are functional.
So that's Kvothe.
Yeah.
That's Kvothe for now.
Yeah, we're going to always be talking about Kvothe because Kvothe is not only the main character, Kvothe is our viewpoint into the world. So who Kvothe is the spine of the story. So we'll always be talking about Kvothe, but that's what we got to learn about him in the short introduction that is the first 17 chapters of the book.
So then we've got Old Cobb. One of the first lines of the book. Old Cobb was filling his role as storyteller and advice dispensary. Every village in every fantasy world has an Old Cobb. He's like such an archetypal character, or like trope, or tropotype. Archetrope.
Do you think that Old Cobb might look a lot like an 80-year-old Patrick Rothfuss?
I actually always pictured Old Cobb looking like Dandy Andy with like a hardcore rim of hair right around here, not fully bald.
Old Cobb 100% has horseshoe bald.
Yes.
I don't think he'd look like 80-year-old Pat Rothfuss unless like he got some kind of wasting disease, because Old Crabfuss.
Old
Cobb has to be skinny. He's got to be a skinny, bent old man, doesn't he?
I mean, I think pretty much everyone in Nowhere is pretty fucking skinny because it seems like everyone in that region is poor as shit.
Yeah, I feel like if anyone isn't skinny, it is explicitly stated.
Yeah. So Old Cobb is trope as fuck. And I wanted to bring him up here because he's the first name character. He's the first spoken line of dialogue. And I don't...
What is the first spoken line of dialogue? Sorry, I'm a playwright. This is how it works for me. What is it? Oh, I have the book.
You have the text right in front of you.
Oh, when he awoke, Tarbolin the Great found himself locked in a high tower. The very first spoken line of dialogue is in the storytelling, and it is when he awoke, which is that is such a classical, like every story is a mystery. Every story is revealing what world you exist within, and that's super charming.
And this is a book that is about nested narratives, and it starts at the top narrative with another nested narrative, and it starts in media res in both of them, which is cute. This book is very cute with the meta narratives. So as well as being the first name character in the first line of dialogue, he's also a storyteller in a book about stories and storytellers.
You keep telling me things about characters that are making me feel silly for not noticing in the first place. Of course. This is a story about a storyteller telling a story. And the very first character we meet is a storyteller.
They're all storytellers, Beth.
Just that you're hearing hear this storyteller, like this thing that he no longer is at this point. It's just charming. I like it. It's charming.
And,
Guys, I like this book we already like.
Hopefully we'll like it more and not hate it. If we do this really right, we will entirely defy our name.
Which is the Fun Killer Chronicle for those of you who are listening to the first episode for the first time. That's us. We're the Fun Killer Chronicle.
That's the title of the podcast that you probably downloaded.
You're much more used to it than we are. This episode probably sat in your podcasting app for a couple weeks before you listen to it because it is a long podcast. We understand you need to wait for the right time to listen to something a couple hours long, but we appreciate it. We're the Fun Killer Chronicle.
So we've got this character who opens the book and he's telling a story. And since it is a story and a story about stories, I thought we should flag what the story is. And first thing about the story is that it's dubious. Even the smith's apprentice, who is so low status, he's still called boy, feels that he can challenge
the veracity
of components of this tale throughout to old Cobb, who clearly is the authority on everything. He's old Cobb. Second, it's about the Chandrian, and it's about Taborlin, a great hero who knew the name of all things, and so all things were his command. So in this book, Name of the Wind, first thing we hear is a story about a man who knows names of things. If old Cobb is Pat Rothfuss's stand-in, he seems like he'd be a pisser to drink with.
I really like that, even though we're told from the get-go that like stories can't be trusted, and there's all of this fog of war around the information that you get. Whenever information is presented to me in a line of verse or a story that someone is telling in the narrative, I trust that information more than the rest of the information I've been giving.
Yeah, there's probably not a sung or rhymed line that isn't immensely significant.
I mean,
except maybe
say
Tinker
that.
Tailor. There's some lines from Tinker Tailor.
Nah, man. I'm going to say there's like maybe one or two pieces of information in any given section of verse. I remembered from my first read through them being much more pertinent, but there's a bunch of stuff in there that's just lines tying lines together.
Next is Bast. Bastus, son of Remen, prince of Twilight and the Telwyth Mile. Whatever that is. Quote, he was dark and charming, with a quick smile and cunning eyes. And
hot.
All right. That's the first description we get of Bast. A little later we get, in fairness, something ought to be said about Bast. At first glance, he looked to be an average, if attractive, young man. But there was something different about him. For instance, he wore soft black leather boots. At least, if you looked at him, that's what you saw. But if you happened to catch a glimpse of him from the corner of your eye, if you were standing in the right type of shadow, you might see something else entirely. What you see is cloven hooves, and that his eyes are sometimes blue emeralds instead of normal eyes. But that's only sometimes. And so Bast is one of the folk. He's a thirsty boy and would much rather study girls than arcane texts. He is Quoth's student, and he cares for Quoth in a way that suggests a bond deeper than teacher and student. And Quoth's patience with Bast's shitty study habits supports this thesis. I am going to mention that he is the first encounter we have with the folk, and we learn some things about their nature. We learn that they're affected by iron in a way that is to some degree similar to the Scrael, who are the only other monstery things we've met. They have some inhuman features. In the case of Bast, the gemstone eyes, the cloven hooves, and there's some way that they can hide these through illusion or glamour, and that may be because the folk are magic, or it may be because they've learned magic. And the other thing that we've learned here is that the folk can and would want to and would need to learn magic from a human. So whatever it is to be the folk, it's not something that couldn't be improved by studying under a human teacher. That's what we know about Bast. And then we've got Chronicler, Devin Lochi's The Great Debunker. We don't ever actually get a physical description of Chronicler. What we get that, for me, tells you who Chronicler is. Quote, Chronicler climbed down from his horse. He had been robbed before and knew when there was nothing to be gained by discussion.
That's so funny. I realize I have such a visual picture of Chronicler, as I do of all of the characters, by the way. I didn't realize we never really got a physical description of him.
Not in these chapters. Maybe we'll get a little something later. The only physical descriptor we get of him is that he was pale when he came down from being
the
knocked
horse.
out. Yeah.
Or came up from his fucking concussion.
Yeah, that is the only physical. We don't know his
Isn't that
anything about him.
funny? I feel like the characters that are really detailedly physically described and the ones that are only emotionally described are all still very vivid in my mental imagery.
Mm-hmm.
I also want to flag that when Chronicler is revealing himself to Kvothe, says, "Oh, he's not just a chronicler, he's the chronicler." But that's the last time that definite article shows up. From then on, he's only chronicler. It goes from title to name. What we're quickly made to understand is that chronicler is a man of reason. He's the author of The Mating Habits of the Common Dracus, which Kvothe calls quite an eye-opener for a young man with his head full of stories. He's a scribe. He's a historian. He's a skeptic. And
He's a man who hides extra money in his boots.
And his bread and his inkwell.
Yeah.
Oh, I'll get to that. So the skeptic for me is interesting because Chronicler is the meta audience in the nested narrative. He stands in for us.
I believe the correct term is embedded audience.
The embedded audience. He is our stand-in the diegetic world, hearing Kvothe's story, and it's important to remember that because Kvothe is telling a story to a specific audience, to the nested audience. So everything that he says is geared at someone he considers extremely discerning and someone who he knows to be a man of means. Like, this is a guy who can have all this money on him and not blink when he loses it, and is smart enough to plan for that loss and to plan for it so precisely he knows how much money to keep in the purse to keep the robber from getting greedy and robbing him again.
But he doesn't know that. He never gets told that story.
No, Kvothe doesn't know that specific bit about the money, but he 100% knows that Devin Lochis is a man who never has to worry about his funds.
Yeah. He understands who he's speaking to.
Yes, he understands who he's speaking to, which is nobility. And I mention this because Patrick Rothfuss flags Chronicler's wealth. That's in there for a reason. And I think that reason is that we should be paying attention to the perspective of wealth and class in this narrative.
And Kvothe immediately brings notice to it as well after he finds out who Chronicler is. He points out that I am not a hero anymore. I am an innkeeper, and this is how much bread is, and this is how much beer costs.
I think when we're listening to Kvothe tell his tales, those are the two things I think we should bear in mind about his intended audience, that he's somebody who is a skeptic, a person who is who he refers to as the great debunker. He's someone who he's going to have to work to convince of fantastic things.
But he's also talking to someone who's writing him in transcript, right?
Yes.
Like, this is what he demands of Chronicler when Chronicler sits down with him. He's like, show me how you can get my word for word correct. So to some extent, he's talking to Chronicler, but he's also talking to all of people in this world, right? He is into the thing that Chronicler pokes at him to get him to do is to set his record straight or to tell his version of the story or whatever.
Yes, Kvothe is definitely telling a version that he expects to be the definitive story of Kvothe by Kvothe. But I don't think it's unfair to expect his presentation to be colored by the person in the room.
Persons, then, because he's also telling it to Bast.
He is also telling it to Bast. You're right.
Which I expect he knew the whole time.
He intended to tell it to Bast.
But he makes asides. At least in these early chapters, there are digressions as a narrator that contain information that's not relevant to the story he's presenting. He makes little narrators asides. we can understand them as being spoken to chronicler, even if they are, to some degree, even if they are meant to be
spoken directly
to the
audience.
Reader. Yeah. The other thing we know is that, so far, is that chronicler is a colleague of Kvothe's friend Scarpi, but not Scarpi's apprentice. Then we've got Abenthi. Quote, he was portly, with twinkling eyes that moved quickly from one thing to another. He had a strip of dark gray hair running around the back of his head, but, and this is what I remember most about him, no eyebrows. Rather, he had them, but they were in a perpetual state of regrowing from being burned off in the course of his alchemical pursuits. It made him look surprised and quizzical all at once. He spoke gently, laughed often, but never exercised his wit at the expense of others. He cursed like a drunken sailor with a broken leg, but only at his donkeys. They were called Alpha and Beta, and Abenthi fed them carrots and lumps of sugar when he thought no one was looking. Chemistry was his particular love, and my father said he'd never known a man to run a better still. End quote. So Abenthi is an arcanist. It's the first arcanist we meet. He was first introduced in an argument with the mayor of a small town about being not just a tinker, but also a peddler and an arcanist. And this is interesting because before we knew anything about arcanists, we knew that tinkers are held in high regard in this world. And Abenthi feels that this undersells his profession. We see that arcanists are subject to religious prejudice, as the mayor tells them that the town is God-fearing and has no want for his dark arts. His wagon announces him as arcanist extraordinary, scribe, dowser, chemist, dentist, rare goods, and all ailments tended. Ailments is spelled A-L-E-M-E-N-T-S, which he explains as a joke about brewing. And this tells us both about how much one needs to know to be an arcanist, and also that Abenthi is a comedic character, a creature of good humor, if bad puns. Abenthi is 100% a classic hero's journey archetype. He is the hermit in the woods, the old tutor, the weird old man who opens the eyes of the protagonist to a wider world. Quote, Abenthi started to call me Red, and I called him Ben, first in retaliation, then in friendship. I just really kind of love that in retaliation. And Abenthi being Ben is basically impossible for someone from my generation to ignore. This entire first act rhymes so hard with the first act of Star Wars in so many ways. Ben is wise, kind, charmingly bonded with his donkeys, and a powerful arcanist who knows the name of the wind. He's a wise enough tutor to see when he has a student in his tutelage whose power and potential outstrip Ben's ability to teach safely. And in this, he grossly diverges from old Ben Kenobi, who made this mistake in a pretty notable way.
As long as you admit that none of the stuff in Star Wars about Anakin is canon. I mean, I think the one thing that really jumped out at me was, with as knowledgeable as Ben is, Kvothe's ingenuity still surprises Ben. And Kvothe is still thinking about the world and how to use sympathy in a way that, like, Ben does not expect.
Yeah, Kvothe is clearly a remarkable specimen.
Mm-hmm.
So then we've got Kvothe's folks. Quote, my father was a better actor and musician than any you have ever seen. My mother had a natural gift for words. They were both beautiful, with dark hair and easy laughter. They were rude down to their bones, and that, really, is all that need be said. Save perhaps that my mother was a noble before she was a trooper. She told me my father had lured her from a miserable, dreary hell with sweet music and sweeter words. I could only assume she meant 3 Crossings, where we went to visit relatives when I was very young once. We don't learn terribly much about Kvothe's parents beyond the above. We know that they're extremely amorous. There are several scenes of them being very sexual with one another in a pretty sweet way. We know that they collaborate and that they are nurturing to Kvothe. His father, Arl, is a songwriter of renown and notoriously never performs even a note of his songs in front of anyone but Kvothe's mother, who is instrumental in the songwriting process, providing lyrical prowess to complement Arl's musical gifts.
Of his new songs, of his brand new songs.
Of his new songs.
Yeah.
They're unaware of Kvothe's singular nature until informed of it by Ben. He is their beloved and talented child, and they have not noticed just how monumentally talented he is. At the end of Ben's conversation with them about Kvothe, we get this. My father was looking down at my mother, nestled under his arm. How about it, woman? Did you happen to bed down with some wandering god a dozen years ago? That might solve our little mystery. She swatted at him playfully, and a thoughtful look crossed her face. Come to think of it, there was a night about a dozen years ago. A man came to me and bound me with kisses and chords of chorded song. He robbed me of my virtue and stole me away. She paused. But he didn't have red hair. Couldn't have been him. Lorien, which is Kvothe's mother's name, though we haven't actually seen it in these chapters, is obviously referring to Arl and teasing him. But there's the bit about red hair, and Kvothe explicitly describes them both as having dark hair in his only physical description of them.
Is Kvothe's old dad?
Whoa.
I mean, they got wigs,
Mind
right?
blown.
They've got wigs in these olden days.
Kvothe's family life extends far beyond his parentage, and he remarks on all that he learned from the various members of the troupe. But his love and affection for his parents is obvious in his language. In particular, his mother is often spoke of in musical metaphors. Her voice is a flute or bells. Her smile is the sun. If Kvothe is, in fact, his father's son, he shares both his musical gift and his discursive curiosity. This bodes darkly, as it was precisely that curiosity that gets Arl and the entire rest of the Adamaru troupe killed by the Chandrian. And last we have the Chandrian. These are not fairy tales. Myths and legends don't murder performing troops and burn their wagons. These are powerful beings of some sort, and we know at least some of their mythical signs of their presence are real. Fire burns blue, wood and metal disintegrate, and we learn 2 of their names. We learn about Cinder, who actually bothers to interact with Quote a bit before moving to murder him, and we have Lord Haliax, whom the other Chandrian, we assume, who Kvothe encounters, serve. Haliax is cloaked in shadows and is likely the one called Shadow-Hamed.
And you got to watch out with him because your spell check is going to keep trying to change his name to Halifax.
Oh my God.
But it is not Halifax.
You cannot write his name.
Yeah, and when you're reading it and your autocorrect has already changed it to Halifax, like you got to remember to say Haliax.
It's actually only Haliax's need to dominate his thralls and demand Cinder does not act without his permission that saves young Kvothe from the fate that befell the rest of his family.
All right, guys. Well, good job. Let's take another break so I can pee and grab a beer, and then...
This is another advertisement for peeing and beer. Peeing and beer, at some point, peeing and beer will pay us to do this podcast.
Do you have more characters?
That was all the characters we've met so far.
You're so good.
Peeing and beer, brought to you by Peeing and Beer.
All right. Hold on 2 seconds and we'll be back for even more of this podcast.
We're the Fun Killer Chronicle.
Did you used to love that book? Sucker.
very first thing I want to talk about when it comes to the story is the structure and the point of view. Like, I can't say his name. Patrick. This is why I want to call him PR.
Pat Rothfuss.
Pat Rothfuss.
Rothfuss.
The problem is the last name. It's
Rothfuss.
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 It's like Rothfuzz, but with a soft S.
Yeah, we're all pronouncing a Demaroo differently. We can call Rothfuss whatever the Rothfuss
It's Alar.
it is.
The author.
Patty Pats. Your winter boyfriend.
The author has done this wonderful setup that allows for a bunch of different narrative voices. The first one, which is third person omniscient, and then the second one, which is an unreliable first person narrative that is sort of historically omniscient, which is a little complicated. So I'm going to step back and just talk about point of view for a minute. In narrative, there are three typical points of views. There's first person, second person, and third person. First person is in I am telling you about how I went to the store. I murdered a giant spider. It
was self-defense.
It is one person telling a story to another person about themselves. It's limited by what the character knows and sees. And it also inherently invokes the unreliable narrator. At least it evokes it to me. Because you're living in the head of the main character. And they can only see themselves in the world through their own eyes. So you might see them differently. Second person is rarely used. You won't run into it very often. It's a you pronoun. It's not a pronoun. What do you call it when you're saying like I, you, they?
That's a pronoun.
It's a pronoun.
Yeah.
It's the you pronoun. It's basically saying you go to the store, you pick up this object, you feel this way about someone.
You will find this in 3 places in popular literature. You'll find this in Choose Your Own Adventure books.
Oh, yeah.
You'll find it in one book by Tom Robbins. Stay tuned for our next podcast project where we read through all of Tom Robbins in a weekend and then die.
Each of us just read one book, and then we all come away with the same thing from one book, but one of us has to read a terrible book in second person.
And you will find this in the genius work of N.K. Jemisin. Check out the Broken Earth series.
Oh, yeah. That's so good. I forget that it's that. I think second person is really interesting. I've seen it in a bunch of short stories work effectively. I think it's a fascinating choice to try writing, but to me, it always sounds like the author's trying to hypnotize you. And like you have a creepy narcissistic partner telling you who you are in hopes that you will believe them. And then the third point of view is third person, shockingly. And it is by far the most common, and it is by far the easiest approachable as a fiction narrative, I guess. Third person is someone outside of the person, so you would say someone by someone's name, like Rex went to the store, he did this, he thought this. So third person is outside of any of the individual characters, and they can see more or less. So third person has this specific divide, which is third person limited and third person omniscient. So an omniscient character can literally see everything. Toni Morrison is the person who does this to the most extreme effect. Like, she will talk about the rivers, the stones, the inside of one person, the history of another, the butterfly wing. The third person omniscient narrator can move anywhere and do anything. They can tell you about any character, any of their thoughts. They're not limited at all at what they can expose to you. But there's more frequently what you have is a third person limited narrator, which is like they can see sort of from this character's point of view. They know sort of what is going on here, or they have a future perspective that allows them to tell you slightly more things.
If you read the Song of Ice and Fire books,
yeah,
each chapter is a limited third person locked to the perspective of one of the primary characters, but not first person from their perspective.
Exactly. And so one of the cool things about this is so all of these different points of view help tell different stories. And what Patrick Rothfuss
Rothfuss
is doing is taking advantage of several different storytelling point of views at once. So we start in a third person omniscient, as far as we can tell. It might be limited, but it seems omniscient. We can see things about Coat that he himself doesn't know. The narrative voice will say he sighs even though he doesn't know it. It is giving you this hints into Quoth's character that he himself is not aware of.
I want to say that this is a subtly limited third person, and my evidence for this is that in the chapter where Chronicler first encounters Quoth at the fire, there's a hard line break where the perspective shifts from the perspective of Chronicler to this perspective of Quoth. Mm-hmm. The inclusion of that typographical break and then the strict adherence to that perspective shows me that that third person is not fully omniscient. It's just
connected to a character, the same way
character connected.
Yeah. So in about the 7th chapter, we move from third person limited omnisciency to first person, but first person in the way that all first persons inherently are, which is an unreliable narrator. Quoth is a storyteller. He's that from the very beginning. He is correcting what he believes the story is. He tells you over and over again, I'm not actually sure if he's told us yet, but that he'll skip over stuff, that he'll change stuff for privacy or for exaggeration. He's told us that he's made up his own stories in the past. And Chronicler says right in the beginning, he's like, what holds out? A good story or the truth? And then that's when Quoth is like, I am going to tell you the story because I am a great storyteller and can probably get you closer to the truth than what we've had thus far.
And though we haven't seen it yet in this read through, I can say without spoilers that we are going to get a lot of contextualizing by Quoth as the narrator regarding the relationship between stories of heroic deeds and the deeds themselves, the relationship between one's identity and the stories one tells about oneself and one's understanding of stories and how that affects the stories one tells about oneself.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to...
It's a story about stories. This is a podcast about a story about stories.
Patrick Roth has set himself up. Is that his gender?
Patrick.
He does refer to himself on his Instagram as your winter boyfriend.
What?
Maybe it's Twitter.
God damn it. I have to fucking figure out how to Instagram more better.
Well, God damn it, I forgot my point.
Patrick Rothfuss is your winter boyfriend.
And has a big beard.
I know, that wasn't where I was going with that. All right, we'll skip on to the one. Oh, we were talking about why I think structure is important. How'd I get so stoned before these things? I think we will find the secret key to the story, and the heart and the soul of the story is supported by the structure. And if you, and in general, breaking down sort of these concepts and theories aren't just teaching me how to teach undergrads story structure. I swear it's not just because of that. It's also because as we go forward, we'll have a shared vocabulary, which will allow us, hopefully, to do some really deeper analysis of what is going on in this story. So the final concept, the second and final concept that I want to introduce for this, our very first episode, is the diegetic universe. So diegetic is an interesting term that I feel like more movie people know than other people, but I
L. Ron Hubbard came up with it. There's this whole book. It's the most sold book of all time.
Scientologists? Is that what we're doing?
You know, I didn't think that diegetics was going to be right for me until I took a stress test.
Over
and found out I was
75 million sold.
I love you guys.
Yeah, Scientology is bullshit.
But diegetics
we got to let that land. Scientology is bullshit.
Incredibly bullshit. It is fake. Please don't believe that.
Yeah, but diegetics is real.
So I was introduced to this concept. I have to introduce it to you in the roundabout way that I came to understand it, because it's the best way I know how to explain it. So I'm a sound designer, and diegetics in sound is there's diegetic sound and non-diegetic sound in movies. Diegetic sound is sounds that characters can hear. So it's like a phone ringing or something playing on the radio or someone singing at a karaoke bar. That is diegetic sound. It is sound that is in the world. And then non-diegetic sound is like the score or voiceover or stuff that the characters themselves cannot hear. So when you do sound design, it's pretty important to know which of those things are doing what. So when it comes to talking about science fiction, fantasy, and horror, the diegetic world is the things that are inside the world. They are things that exist that the characters can see. I am fascinated by horror, fantasy, and sci-fi, mostly because I adore the worlds that they build. And so my absolute favorite narratives that are in those genres reveal the world in the same way they reveal the characters, in the same way they reveal the plot. That the whole story, the whole picture, the thing that you gain from it is not just what individual characters do, but the world that they reveal by doing it. Because they're not normative worlds. There's magic in this world. There's wizards, there's sympathy. We know some things about how this world isn't our world, and as we go on, we're going to continue to learn what the boundaries and realities of this world are. And one of the things that I like to point out about this particular world is it starts in this really classic fantasy fashion, which is that this world, there's no magic here. There's no demons here. This is we're a kind of normal world. And that as we go on, we get revealed how much magic there is. And that's such a great trope. It's the trope of the fucking Hobbit. It's the trope of Harry Potter. It's like the baseline fantasy trope. It is the gritty version of fantasy. Because this is where we live. We live in a world where ostensibly magic is not real. It's
one of the things I like most about the Song of Fire and Ice is that almost the entire first book
I'm going to say 11,000 hours of audio. There's no magic except for that one hint of fucking zombies.
Yeah, there's almost no magic in the first book and most of the second and third.
I would say George R.R. Martin is a bit of a magic tease. And I'm not saying it's wrong or bad, but I'm saying that Patrick Rothfuss is someone who is both immediately. We live in a magic world that a whole bunch of people deny, and a magic world that very few know the limits or capabilities of. And so right away we're like, yeah, the Chandrian are something that everybody laughs at, but they're kind of real. And demons, sure, demons don't exist, but these spiders do. Also, this guy may or may not be the reality is that the average person does not necessarily believe in magic and has no idea of what the universe is capable of.
And that's going to be an important through line in the narrative. And another thing I wanted to flag about Quoth's intended audience is that when Quoth, I have a hard time hitting that V in his name all the
Doesn't
time.
matter.
When Quoth is telling his story, he's telling it to a diegetic audience.
Yeah, embedded listeners
Embedded-
is one of the terms that you call a first-person narrative, which is what he's doing when the switch between 7 and 8, when his words have quotes around it. Like, this is just a stupid thing. That's the point where it stops, where his voice becomes the narrative voice and no longer has quotes. It is him speaking, but it's him telling us the story. And often first person, and especially diegetic narratives are there's an embedded audience. There's an audience that they're speaking to.
The embedded audience is an audience that exists diegetically, regardless of whether a particular statement of Kvothe's is loaded towards chronicler or Bast or the eventual reader of Chronicler's Chronicle. They're all in Kvothe world. They're not in real world. His story is not for us. So there's a baked in set of assumptions about the listener that we might be able to tease something out of by being keyed into.
On that note, I would like to leave us with a moment of third person omniscient perspective on him. So at the end of where we're at, his whole family and world has been destroyed. And we come back out into the interlude and we are with him and Bask and Chronicler again. And at first when I picked it up and I read it, I was like, oh, it's a relief. Because this is so tragic and so sad to remind you, hey, this human survived and they're here and they're okay. And he even kind of japes at them about his feelings. And it's like this moment of emotional relief as a reader, at least for me. And then you watch him go out back and there's just this line that kills me that is, even though no one was there, he covers his eyes to cry. And it's this moment that the third person omniscient can only allow for. It's a moment that he wouldn't share with us if he could choose not to. And it is the reason why he is such an empathetic character that you can get into. Because you get to hear his first person, but you also get to see these moments he wouldn't choose to share with you.
Yeah, it's a good contrast to what he projects, which is like to Bast, what would you have me do with this anguish from when I was a child, to going outside and letting himself experience the very private anguish that he needs to release.
Because so much of this narrative is the first-person narrative of Kvothe. So much of what we're getting is...
It's funny because we're talking about the first section, which almost half of it is outside of the first-person narrative, but we spend the vast majority of these books inside Kvothe's historical, third-person, omniscient perspective of his own childhood.
His unreliable, self-serving, myth-making...
third person historically omniscient. Yes.
And that's also what that interlude tells us. It reminds us a thing that Kvothe knows and is keeping in mind explicitly, which is he is telling his story to Chronicler, who is a reporter. So he is giving the information he wishes to pass on to Chronicler, and his private anguish that he needs to process by crying. That's not a part of the story that he's telling. That's not information they get to have about Kvothe the Bloodless.
So do we want to take a moment and talk about predictions? People want to tap out at this point if they have not gotten past this. I felt very interested in re-engaging with the book because I hadn't read it in a minute, but I've listened to it several times. And the things that just popped right out at me were kind of crazy. And I was like, okay, the Waystones and the Greystones, These are huge. I didn't remember that it was him touching one in his dream that allowed him to remember all of these or remember or create all of these memories of survival in the outdoors.
Yeah, that's some Matrix shit.
I had no idea Basque was so fairy-y. I didn't before, like, I just didn't catch it. I was just like, right, we're in fantasy. He's a fantasy thing. Like,
That I carried the whole way through. Like, I've been half expecting to find Bast in the background of a scene. Like, my entire reading of those stories, the, 1.5 times I read my way through them.
I was really impressed at how fast the Chandrian were introduced.
Almost immediately.
In the first page.
The theme of the book is stated right up front. Like this is a classic fractal narrative style. Like what we can expect out of this narrative is that there's going to be an amulet that saves Kvothe that he gets from a tinker. I think they laid it right out there.
Oh, you're so right.
I mean, that's going to be like...
But tinkers are so fundamentally important. Like, waystones are important. Tinkers are fucking important. The names of things clearly are like the bedrock of power in this universe. And
well, there's the powerful and there is the power of things. And if you are powerful, but you also have like the right thing that's been imbued with power in it, ooh, boy, you could bring down kingdoms.
so the thing that I hadn't noticed about, of course I hadn't noticed about when the Chandrian have killed all their parents and there's Hexagonal or whatever his name is.
Halifax.
Halifax
Lord Halifax
knows the names of Cinder and the other. That is what he's saying. Before you like totally understand what the name power is, I didn't catch that at all the first time around. And it's like, oh, that's the same thing that Kvothe has about the fairy lady later on.
Well, and about his own name. Like, it's no mistake that Kvothe surrounds himself with so many AKAs. People not knowing exactly how to pin him down is one of the powers he has.
And this is...
I like that.
There's a lot of the magic universe in this universe that is taken directly from real world occult thought, and the name of supernatural entities, demons, angels, what have you, is
supposed to bind them.
That's how you control them.
It's so funny, and of course,
Well, I mean, it was one of the basics of like my communication coursework when I was majoring in communications is that we
Was
are creatures.
demonology?
When we got to the section on Hellblazer, yes, but that was like a 212 course or something like that. I'm talking about like 101, 102. Like we naturally categorize things and we don't know how to think about things that we haven't categorized. It is very difficult for us to process things that we can't name. And as a culture that doesn't think too much about its emotional responses to things, maybe we live in a culture that isn't able to deal with some of its emotional problems. Sorry, this...
do you guys want to talk for a minute right now with where we are in rereading about predictions that we think are going to happen for the third book? One of my big ones is like, we've got to see Abernathy again. We got to see Ben again. We have to. I'll be so sad if we don't.
I mean,
love
it says we
him.
do.
Yeah, everything is being set up.
Everything is set up, and we'll finally figure out what the shit is up with Bast. I hope.
Maybe that's in that side narrative book.
Well, we'll find out how Kvothe comes across Bast. At least.
So
Absolutely, we've got to, because I assume, and I might be wrong, but this is structure for you. I assume we have to end up in the present day with Chronicler Basque and Kvothe solving something, doing something. It cannot end with just him telling the end of his story.
No,
right?
it can't because we've set up a conflict.
Right, the
It's
spiders
Chekhov's
are coming
scrael.
over the map.
Yeah.
Chekhov's scrael. Exactly.
Yeah.
It would be so unsatisfying otherwise. And I'm really hoping that Patrick can stick the landing because this is such a goddamn fun book despite the next series of chapters.
Can you say Rotfoots?
Rotfoots.
There you go. Patrick Rotfoots.
It just, nothing sticks in my head.
Fotsruth.
But
Rothbard?
I really can't do PR.
Robitussin.
R. Pats.
Patty Pat Pit Pat Rothfoss.
I can just say the author. I learned that in grad school.
Yeah. The author.
The author. He is dead.
So I mean, I have a couple predictions for the third book based on like these
Ice
first 17
cream?
chapters. Yeah, that's our ice cream truck. The boy loves it. I'm sure this is making it in. I'm gonna wait till it goes by. So I'm pretty sure the that Kvothe's sword, which is
Oh, God. We
it's
haven't
either
even
called-
got that yet.
it's either called Folly.
No, the
or-
mounting board is called Folly.
or the mounting board is indicating that this sword itself is a folly.
He's labeling the sword folly.
Yeah.
Maybe it is folly.
I'm pretty sure that that is Cinder's sword, but I'm not entirely sure.
Wow, that's a great prediction.
They are the only weapons that are called out as looking a certain grayish whitish way. And like obviously being like hyper there.
Well, clearly in the third book, he has to, in some way, confront the Chandrian.
Yes.
This is an unavoidable reality.
No.
If
That
he
is what
weren't
the
going
entire
to
narrative is
confront
building
the
towards.
Chandrian,
Yeah.
he wouldn't have learned kung fu from the blaxploitation people.
Those people weren't black.
They're just Turks.
Yeah, they're totally Turks.
Oh, so they're doing that sexy leather pants wrestling.
Yes.
Yes.
With the olive oil.
How did you not see that from the first place? In the first place, it's so obvious.
I was reading it while vomiting. We'll get into that later.
One last thing that we can see. Let's attempt to fuck, marry, kill.
Oh, you mean sleigh bed wed?
Slay, bed, wed.
Well, don't we have to like choose three characters first, or are we just choosing any three characters?
You can choose any new characters in right now.
Yeah, this is going to be a tight one because we've only got so many characters.
Yeah, I know, but I've been thinking about it. There are very few female characters either.
Oh, okay. So D-Day, sleigh bed wed.
I mean, I slay Heliax.
You don't understand how this game works at all.
I'm sorry, what? I have been a good boy these past several hours.
No, you have. You've been listening so deep.
Yeah, I took my fucking meds first, Beth. I don't want to talk about it. Yes, Rex?
You get three options. You have to sort them. That's how this game works.
Right, but who are the options?
Right. You have to wait for me to give you the options before you start
you're
picking.
in charge of this.
Yes, that's how this game works.
Did we give him fucking games that he's in charge of? Do I
mean,
not
if he
get
has
it?
the
Beth,
three characters-
where the fuck are my games?
You can point it at one of us.
It goes around
A
into
circle.
circle.
Okay, well, like the listeners and I need to know this
All
first,
right,
guys.
You're right. We need to establish this.
We've been playing sleigh bed wed for well on 100 span. I don't understand why you don't know the rules yet.
I'm usually in my cups by then. in my cups by then. Look, I'm a poet just like Patrick Rothfuss.
Sleigh bed wed.
Uh-huh.
Alpha, beta, Ben.
I mean, I definitely slay Alpha because, I mean, it's some sort of cart animal. Is it a donkey?
They're
They're both
donkeys.
donkeys.
They're both donkeys.
Alpha
Great.
and
Well, I've
beta.
never had donkey, but I'm sure it's better than people. So that's slay, and then bed, and then wed. Well, I'm gonna bed Ben, Because
Strong choice.
yeah, well,
Yeah.
I've been married, and and Ben seems pretty set in his ways. And I'm certainly. Let's admit that if Ben and I get together and get married, like one of us is going to be under the other's thumb, and he's not going to be under my thumb. So we're going to fuck that guy and let him move on to his lady with the brewery. And in terms of wedding, I will wed Omega because
It's
That's not a
beta.
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 It's beta. You just went to the other end of the alphabet.
Beta the donkey?
I was thinking of Omega the goat because I do so love goat. But yes, I will.
You already killed the donkey.
I will. Yeah, but there's two. You said Alpha, Beta, and Ben.
Well, if you thought one of them was a goat and you love goat, why wouldn't you kill the goat?
We didn't have a goat.
All right, your turn. Donkey.
Well, this
fucker.
was a real auspicious beginning to slay, hay, bed.
Slay, bed, wed.
Beth, would you like to do a contrived thing?
Yes. This is this is the plan.
Okay, so slay, bed, wed. We're gonna do Old Cobb and Cinder and Ben.
Complex.
Yeah. That's why I put Ben in there instead of Best. Because we all fucking bast.
We're all into best. I'm gonna go from the perspective of I've only read as much of the novel as I have thus far.
Fair.
And I'm going to say I'm gonna fuck Cinder because he seems really
Lithe.
yeah, asshole-ish, and I've been told that's what women like.
We got to get you off that purple pill page.
And that means I will unfortunately put Doc Cobb to his rest.
Old dead Cobb.
Yeah.
Poor mouthy Cobb.
I don't need an extra narrator, but thank you. And then I would certainly fuck Ben. He seems like a sweetheart. I bet he is really good in bed.
I bet he can make his hand vibrate.
He knows the name of the wind and the location of the clit.
Yeah.
It's nebulous, is the point.
Rex, your three characters for this are the
Young Quoth,
the
old coat, Quoth dressed as a homeless man.
the young man who doesn't get a name yet because he was adopted at 11.
The Smith's Apprentice?
Yeah, the Smith's
Boy?
Apprentice. Boy.
Isn't that Shep?
No.
No.
Or Chronicler. Or the guy who juggles and the guy who juggles and rolls dice always sevens.
Trip.
Who has the knack.
Oh.
Yeah.
Wow, you made that tough on me.
Yeah, there's a bunch of guys with good skills in there.
Well, I mean, all right. So I'm gonna have to get real mercenary with this. It was gonna be wed Chronicler because he's obviously got that money.
Yeah, and he's fascinating.
And he is fascinating. But I'm afraid I'm gonna have to bed the Smith's Apprentice and get that young heat. Chronicler.
He's apparently very tall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the scans.
Chronicler gonna die. Sorry, bro.
Whoa.
But,
Wow, yeah,
you got a lot of
go.
gold on you. Like that's all on your person, son. Why would you do that? And
He's
and Trip, I mean, what a catch. Roll 7 every time. Whew.
yeah, you would want to marry that. You're
He
not
can
wrong.
juggle.
I won't hold that against him.
Yeah, it's not like he's a hypnotist, Beth.
Or a mime.
He's not even an actor. They even
Yeah.
say he's a bad actor. He even can juggle
Yeah.
and roll seven.
Oh,
not even
he's-
a ventriloquist. He's gold.
He might even have a personality. He's not an actor.
You can't tell, but one might hope.
As far as you know, actors have personalities.
Thank you for listening. We'll be back eventually with
The
part
second
2.
section of the King Killer Chronicle.
Well, where we will continue to do this. Thanks for listening. Like, subscribe, share it with your friends.
You can find us on all social media.
All relevant social media.
All relevant social media. All social media that doesn't suck. There, don't look for us on Facebook. We're not doing that.
Fun Killer Pod does not have a Pinterest board and won't.
But try Twitter. You'll probably find us there. We might.
Instagram.
We'll Instagram.
Potentially.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll
and,
Instagram the naked cat.
And of course, funkillerpod@gmail.com.
We're Fun Killer Pod everywhere.
Everywhere.
On all the medias, on all the emails, on all of the websites, on all of the Patreons.
And if that doesn't prove to be true, this is our first episode. Sometimes we make mistakes. Check out episode 2. We'll
Often
be more factual.
we make mistakes.
Yes.
Old iron, clean fire, and the holy name of God. Do you want to know the name of the wind? Gather round, listen. You get your answers by the end.